particular film, but because of a couple of scenes that they really didn't like, pieces got put on the list. There were others as well.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
You were an investigative journalist as well before you did movie reviews. I'm wondering what your career was like doing that. Just any experiences you may have had.
Well, I still do that from time to time, but I was a reporter, and I was a reporter at a good time when people spent a lot of money on investigative journalism. They don't really do that anymore, and most newspapers and even most TV networks, they don't really have these investigative teams or paid guys to work for 2 or 3 months on a story. But I was very fortunate because I worked at Texas Monthly magazine, which was a very well-funded and they were devoted to investigative journalism. And in fact, the editor that I worked for, William Broyles, is now a famous screenwriter. He was nominated for the Academy Award for Apollo 13, and he wrote Unfaithful. Any Unfaithful fans? And he wrote Castaway. But anyway, he liked long investigative stories, and so I did a number of them. I did one that was an undercover art theft investigation that was ranged over 3 continents and it's still on a shelf somewhere at MGM. They bought the story, and then it goes into development, and then they pay this screenwriter and the next screenwriter and the next screenwriter. And finally, they've spent like $2 million on it, and it's still not made. And so the original people that were going to produce it, they've left. And so they say, anybody who wants to make it, it's fine. Just give us the $2 million we have in it, and you can have it. And actually, the main script was written by Carl Gottlieb, the writer of Jaws, and I saw him a couple times, and he was like, "Whatever happened to that thing?" He said, "It was one of my favorite scripts." So I said, "Well, Carl, they paid you so much money that nobody can ever make the film." So, but I enjoyed that work, but I was never good at. I was good at the long investigative piece, but I was not good at the, slide down the flagpole and go to the hurricane scene or whatever. I didn't like. I hated that. I did that, but I hated that. I didn't like. And I never liked interviewing grieving widows. If I never have to do that again the rest of my life, I never want to do that again, because you always have to bother people right at the moment that their closest relative just died. I hate that. So.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
It's a 2-part question, and this is kind of about the horror hosts. A, do you believe there's any room on cable or satellite TV anymore for them? And B, what's your thoughts of all these horror hosts that are coming out of the woodwork all of a sudden for local, like, public access stations and stuff like that around the country?
Well, the horror host was always everything in TV is done for an economic reason. There's never anybody just sitting around saying, "Hey, wouldn't this be fun?" And so the reason you had horror hosts in the first place in the 50s, usually the horror host at any local station in the 50s was the sales guy. He was the sales guy who sold the ads. And he put on the makeup, and he developed a persona so that he could create a little franchise for himself, and he could sell ads for it. So when he wasn't being the Count Dracula guy, he was calling on the local car dealership to sponsor the Count Dracula guy. And so there was always an economic incentive. The economic incentive in the 80s was that I can tell you what happened at the movie channel. They would buy these vast, in order to buy movies for a cable channel, to get the one movie you want, you got to buy 40 that you don't want. And so they would buy these vast packages of movies. And they would say, what are we going to do with these? Well, hosting is the only thing we can do, because people, a lot of you won't remember this because you're too young, but there was a type of movie called the West German sex comedy. You know, back when there were two Germanys. And in West Germany, you had the West German sex comedy. They were some of the most abysmal films ever made. But we used to show one called She's 19 and Ready. And it would always get these great ratings, even though she was 45 and she was never going to be ready in her life. But anyway, people would somehow respond to the title, and they would always watch She's 19 and Ready. We must have shown it like 6 times on my show alone. And without hosting, it would be unbearable. People would zone out after 10 minutes of it, you know. The West German sex comedy was only slightly worse than the Italian sex comedy, which tended to be pedophilia. Basically pedophilia. It would be dirty old men plots, you know. And so we would have to sell that. And then to me, the worst of all was the British sex comedy, Adventures of a Plumber's Mate. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen any of these things, but you know, they have the male protagonist always gets naked out on the street at some point in the course of the so he gets trapped on the street naked, and he has to run down the street naked, and they play fast music and they speed up the film, you know, like Benny Hill, you know, and that's that's so funny in England, you know, but we showed a lot of those, and so anyway, they would have these film packages, and they would try to make them more palatable to the public by having them hosted. And so that was my job, to take all the horror films. And you have to remember, it was a different era when there was horror films were kind of disreputable. They weren't even reviewed. When I started reviewing them, I was one of the first people ever to review horror films in mainstream publications. So there was me, Bill Landis was a guy who did a fanzine called Sleazoid Express, and he would go to all the Times Square theaters and review the films that played there. But basically, I was the only guy who reviewed the films. And in fact, there were mainstream film critics who said they should not be reviewed and who criticized me for that. Janet Maslin at the New York Times thought that it was terrible that I was reviewing some of these films, much less celebrating them. And we were supposed to have a face-off one night on Nightline, and she didn't show up, you know. So we never had the face-off. But I was constantly attacked. I was attacked by this guy Donald Wildman of Citizens for Decency, Tupelo, Mississippi. It's now called the American Family Association. He maintained that the movies I reviewed actually caused crime, that it caused people to, you know, sort of the same thing that was later made, same argument later made about rap music, that you watch the movies and it causes you to go off the deep end and kill your sister, you know. Now, I was on a couple of panels with Donnie, as I call him, and I said, Donnie, I said, you know what, if your theory is correct, then I've seen 40,000 of these things. Hook me up to any machine you want to hook me up to, you know, study my brain waves, and if I commit any felony, you know, then I will concede your point. Now, he was sort of like poo-pooing that like I was making fun of him, but I said, you know, it's like, whenever anyone makes that remark, they're saying, well, I'm not talking about us. I'm not talking about you and me. I'm talking about them. You know, I'm talking about the unbalanced ones. And I said, well, exactly. They're unbalanced. You know, it's not the movie. It's the person watching the movie. You know, so I never bought this argument about the cause and effect between, you know, the popular culture artifact and what you do with it. You know, so. But that was a common thing. That was a common kind of protest that I would get. And I constantly got protests from women's organizations. I constantly got protests from the Baptist Church. I constantly got protests from the Catholic Church, which I sort of started myself because there was a double feature. There was a famous drive-in double feature called I Drink Your Blood and I Eat Your Skin. Yeah. And I started calling it that great Roman Catholic double feature, I Drink Your Blood and I Eat Your Skin. And the Roman Catholic organization in Milwaukee, I forget the name of it, but it says, they specifically go out looking for Roman Catholic slurs, and then they defend Catholicism, put me on a list. And once I was on that list, it was a constant with the Catholics. So it was the Catholics, the Baptists, the National Organization for Women picketed me, sent postcards. They had this anti-female violence thing. And the reason I had so much trouble fighting back is that, well, I should preface this by saying, let me say one thing first. My theory of satire is it's a machine gun on a swivel. And you hit this target, and this target, and this target, totally at random. You just hit targets. And then 1 in 20 will scream. So you hit them 20 more times. That's how satire works. You identify the sacred cow, and then you destroy the sacred cow. And so that's what I was doing, but I would have no defense when I would get attacked by an organization. For example, one of the organizations was the Mothers Against Drunk Drivers for my views on alcohol. And so, they screamed, they attacked, so I hit them 20 more times. I created this organization called Drunks Against Mad Mothers, DAM, and had these very, very public and bitter debates with Candace Lightner, the founder of Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, who I thought was a lunatic, by the way. And I remember one year when I tried to get her to co-sponsor the pub crawl bus with me, because, and I even said, you don't even have to put up any money, you just have to put the name Mothers Against Drunk Drivers on the side of the pub crawl bus, because they maintained that they were not anti-alcohol, they were anti-driving under the influence of alcohol. And I said, you are not, you are anti-alcohol, and I'll prove it. I know you won't put your name on the side of the pub crawl bus, and I was proven to be correct. They would not put their name on the pub crawl bus. I said, this is saving lives, right? And so, anyway, so my point was, there was no term politically correct. It had not been invented yet. Therefore, I was just a jerk. Because I couldn't say, well, that's nice that you're making me politically correct, because the term politically correct didn't enter the mainstream until 1991. There was a New York Magazine article titled, "Are You Politically Correct?" And people started using it for the first time. But all the previous 10 years when I was having these battles, I didn't have that defense. I wasn't able to say, well, that's politically correct of you. I had no defense. I just had to take it, and so anyway, that's like a long-winded version of what you asked me. I told you, just mention one word and I'll talk. Anybody else?
Questions? I got one.
Okay.
I got another one. Because I gotta ask this. Over the years of doing the movie channel and Monster Vision, you're always holding supposedly a beer in your hand. Was there actually beer in that every time?
It depended on what time of day it was. Because we would sometimes shoot those things at 9 in the morning, and I was not a good morning person. Because of the economics of it, we had to shoot those inserts all in a row. And but I always wanted it to feel like it was live. And so I had two rules. One is the crew had to sit there and wait until I figured out where we were in the movie, because I had a printout of, I knew where the commercial breaks were, so that I could have in my mind the movie, even if, it's weird because no one is seeing the movie except I'm seeing it in my mind. So I would make them wait, which they hate you to make them wait on any kind of set, and I said, I gotta get it in my mind where we are in the movie. And then the other thing is no retakes, so mistakes stay in. Now, the only people that really hated that were the guests, because I would tell them that there's gonna be no retakes, and they would freeze up, and then we would end up having to do retakes anyway. We tried to have a live feel of it, even if it was, 9:30 in the morning.
Yeah, I had to ask because it was like, I can't believe he's drinking that much.
No, later in the day, we were still there at like 6 or 7. And then we'd start
Because
drinking.
especially when you would do those Friday the 13th marathons on Monster Vision, I was just like, it can't be, he's filming this for 8 hours or whatever it is going on. He's doing that much drinking. But
Also, on the movie channel, I smoked cigars, and I started smoking cigars on TNT, and Jane Fonda complained about it. Jane Fonda was married to Ted Turner at the time, and she said, "You can't have people smoking on the air." And I was like, "No, you can't have smoking advertising on the air. You can have people smoking on the air." And so they put a ban. You know, another thing I'm responsible for to this day at TNT: no smoking. No smoking anywhere on the air on TNT.
was there anything that inspired you, how you review the films, your knowledge of the films? Is there anything that...
Roger Corman inspired me, because when I first started reviewing the films, the independent filmmakers, the independent distributors, they'd never been reviewed before, and they actually feared critics. They did not show their movies to critics. And so the first guy to embrace what I was doing was Roger Corman. And so I had several conversations with him where I would say, "Roger, tell me, what are the elements you like to see in this type of film, this type of film, this type of film?" And he loves to talk about that. He would say, "Well, I generally tell my young directors that I want to see at least one motor vehicle sequence within the first 10 minutes, and then usually we have another one, but it can be anywhere in the second third of the movie. I always insist that we have breast nudity. The breast nudity should be at least 3 scenes, and one of those scenes should be a second actress. Not all 3 scenes should be the same actress showing her breast, because, and you know, the girls are sometimes hesitant at first until I explain that we only need 2 scenes of above the waist nudity, and they understand that it's very little. And strangely enough, it delivers a lot of value in the international marketplace. And so, anyway, he would have this way of talking about the elements of an exploitation movie. And by the way, he never liked them to be called B movies, because I would say, "Roger, you know, they call you the king of the B's," and he says, "Yes, I've heard that, and I don't really care for that term."